Hello, and welcome to the first ever episode of a new series for the channel, where you all ask me thought-provoking, difficult questions, and I go, in my best attempt to answer them. It's a bit different than Let's Debate, because debate, you're giving me your opinions, and in this one, you're simply proposing a thought, a question, a quandary. Underused word. Quandary is a good word. And the first question to be asked in is, at what point does sci-fi become magic? If an alien race uses magic as an integral part of their lifestyle, is it a sci-fi or a fantasy race? This is a good question, and one that does need clarification. So, a lot of people think of sci-fi and fantasy for some reason as these like polar opposites, when I think that is just not the case. Sci-fi and fantasy are a Venn diagram that overlap a lot more than people give them credit. That's why sci-fantasy exists. One does not mutually exclude the other, so the answer to are they sci-fi or are they fantasy is yes. What would the state of fantasy be like without Tolkien's influence? It would be very easy to butt kiss and say that fantasy would be entirely different and not nearly on the level it is today. But the reality of the situation is that ideas and concepts and stories kind of come about regardless of the individual. They tend to be more of cultural or society influenced, and one person helms an idea that is permeating the culture. And I think that is kind of similar to what happened with Tolkien. Don't get me wrong, he's an absolute genius for what he did. But a lot of his contemporaries also did amazing stuff for fantasy, and if we didn't have Tolkien, just one of them would probably rise up to fill the spot. So I don't think it'd be too much different. It would be different, and a lot of the early days of fantasy would be trying to copy another author's work, and so those tropes and themes would be a bit different and be the forefront of what fantasy is. But now we have the Tolkien descendants, and there's kind of this weird, like, fantasy was a lot of different things. It converges in Western culture on Tolkien and then breaks off from there, but is largely influenced by him from that spot therefore on. So I think that's the answer I'm going with. I moved further away so that I'm more in the green screen, which I should have done in the first place. The lighting for this is also atrocious. Definitely need to get more lights. Being a full-time fantasy/book YouTuber, do you find a delineation between reading for fun and reading for work? No, that's something I've kind of struggled with, but right now for me they're just one homogeneous blob because I've pretty much stopped reading anything aside from sci-fi or fantasy right now, and I'm not gonna lie, it's pretty dope. Like, I'm not even mad. Is a book technically fantasy if there is no magic or natural for us creatures, and it's only in a different sort of world? Is it really fantasy or simply an alternative fiction/history book? That's really where these genre lines start to break down, and I don't understand how people can continue to disagree with me that genre is largely meaningless outside of some very specific situations. So I think this question in some ways is unanswerable, and because it's unanswerable, it further proves my point that genre is marketing. And yes, there are certainly staples of genres that definitely mean if you have this, you are probably in that genre, but they're not, again, these independent circles. A lot of them are these overlapping, okay, this squeeches in there and this squitches in there. So I'm not saying genre is entirely pointless, but I'm saying it's a lot more bendy, wibbly, wobbly, timey-wimey, as Doctor Who would say, than people give it credit for. Should someone read Lovecraft's works knowing what his beliefs regarding race and gender were? Ooh, is the first classic question. So my answer is simply yes. I've retaked my answer to this several times. It's a hard one to answer. You should be able to read Lovecraft's work, because as far as I know, no one is still making money involved with selling these books who is super racist or anything. It's probably just some big corporations, and okay, who cares? But should you keep in mind that this person was a monster? Yes, Lovecraft was a bigoted bastard. I believe we should educate ourselves and see who influenced the likes of King. That's important. So if he was still alive profiting from me buying his books, I might say no, but now that he's dead and it's probably just a big corporate entity or his descendants who we don't know if they share his beliefs or not, I don't really mind. Medieval Europe is the default setting for many fantasies. If you had the power to change the default to any part of the world and time period, what would it be? Ancient Greece. I want to see more authors take ancient Greek influences into their fantasy, because I think ancient Greece mythology is so interesting and badass. I feel similarly about Egyptian as well. Egyptian mythology, if you've not read into it, is some of the wildest stuff out there. It's so cool. I just basically the whole Mediterranean area. Let's have them pull down from Northern Europe and go into the Mediterranean across the board and have influences from there, because I find the magics and the mythologies and lores of those cultures to be just whoo, interesting to get into. What magic system, if it were real, would have the largest positive impact on the real world? That's a good question, because a lot of them would have a very negative impact. Related, which worlds would be better placed without their magic existing? I would say that the Wheel of Time world would be a lot better without it, because then, you know, well, yeah, I can't get into spoilers here, but let's just say the big bad thing wouldn't be there without it, so maybe. And if it were real, which one would have the largest positive impact? I would say the one that seems to have the biggest constraints in terms of you can't do super mass damage without it would probably be the Harry Potter magic system, because there are limiting factors like wands, which if you take away from someone, you've seriously depowered them. You don't take magic away from them altogether, as we see in the series, but you do limit what they can do. So you are able to then remove the problem from the situation without a whole lot of trouble and effort, and there's only a few spells that are direct murder spells. So I think that one is reasonably controllable, and the positives from it, especially with the things that just break physics and would allow us to have like hordes of food stashes in tiny little containers to just have and give people and solve problems all across the world, would definitely outweigh the negative. With the Wheel of Time the musical, hypothetically, could it work? Why yes or why not? Yes, it could. You put Tom with his harp on a stage and he just goes through every song that's in the series. That's Wheel of Time the musical, and it would be the best show ever. Is this real life or is this just fantasy? Man, I'm very ashamed to say that it's unfortunately just real life. If it was fantasy, I'll probably be able to talk to Pips and ask him why he lies down like that. Here, I'll take a photo. Let's hold up. Let's take a photo of this weird little, like, this is Pip's default laying down pose. You've said that you like when authors take a stand on political or moral issues, but don't like that Terry Goodkind approach of vomiting his ideology into his work. Where is the line in your mind, and what authors/books best exemplify the right way to toe the line? That's a great question. So you kind of hit the nail on the head there with my Goodkind problem, because it is just vomiting his ideology. And I would even be okay with Terry Goodkind's ideology being in the page, because I can enjoy ideologies being presented to me that I don't necessarily agree with. There's several stories that are in my favorites who have philosophies behind them I don't like. But Goodkind poorly represented those ideas and had no nuance to them whatsoever. I want to pull an outside pick here that actually I think could cause some real debate in the comment section, and I think Avatar: The Last Airbender has some incredibly powerful moral, political, ideological questions within it, and it actually does a really phenomenal exploration of those ideas. So I could delve once again into Tolkien's, I could talk about Jordan's, I could even go into like the moral ramifications of warfare we see in the Powder Mage. But for me, one of the most underappreciated and under-talked about, maybe a hint for a video to come, is Avatar: The Last Airbender's moral quandaries and theming. Man, it's impressive. So that'll be the one where I say this towed the line spot on, especially for a kid's show. God damn. I think full in-depth sex scenes in most media and fantasy is pointless and crass. I feel it's cheap and it bogs down the deep and intense plot that the story is telling. Game of Thrones, Westworld, shows like that. I'm going to say this is the last question we answer here, and it's one that I have a pretty strong opinion on. So we see a lot of fantasy and sci-fi authors who will use sexual assault and things like that to show how evil a character is, where I think if you handle it with tact and care, an intimate love scene between characters can show just how much they care about each other, how deep their relationship is. And I think it's an honestly underutilized tool, because so many fantasy or sci-fi authors find or feel that they are writing pornography whenever they delve into a scene like that, where I just feel like that is wrong. There are shows that incorporate sex that don't do it in a way that I feel like, hey, this is giving me anything for the characters, this is just sex for sex sake. But I'm also not going to discount that. I'm a warm-blooded individual. We all have sex drives. Sometimes that's just, you know, we're human beings and we all have libidos. But I really dislike the idea that for some reason we can show so much with a character by how violent and grotesque this assault is, when in reality I find that showing how tender or intimate a coupling can be, you can have just as much exploration of character. Or how awkward and uncomfortable they are. I mean, there can be real relationship development or character development through consensual scenes of intimacy, but a lot of authors flinch away from that. And it's something that I plan on not flinching away from. So expect that in my book, which a lot of people have been asking me to update you on. Yes, I have a few short stories available on my Patreon. You just have to do a $1 tier and boom, you get in there and check it out. You also get to ask authors questions for interviews if they ever come on, so self-promo plug here. You'll also know who I'll be interviewing pretty soon. And for my book itself, I would say I'm roughly 100 pages in, though I just deleted a ton of it because I went back through it and realized this is not the writing voice I want to have. I know people get mad at me for deleting things, but I'm gonna keep deleting them because it's massively cathartic for me to do so. So I'm gonna keep doing it. It feels great to be like, I hate this, poof, you're gone. Anyway, this has been your first ever episode of the show where you ask me questions and I try my best to answer them. That's it. There's no more words that need to go there. Like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. And have a good one, y'all. Peace.